Well, tonight we are continuing our exploration of how the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous help us achieve emotional sobriety. And remember, as we walk through the steps, we are putting on the lens. We're looking at this from the perspective of emotional sobriety. And I don't really think that that's been done much. And so it's a lot of fun for us to explore this together and be pioneers in this journey of looking at how the steps help us achieve emotional sobriety. And I like to start out every discussion with talking about the process that we've been involved with. So tonight we're continuing to look at step 6, like we're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. So how we've gotten here is that we really had to admit our powerlessness. And what's really relevant to emotional sobriety is that this was the beginning of the development of humility for us. So remember the definition of humility I had is that one of the components of humility is the ability to admit our mistakes, to own our limitations, and to own that we have gaps in knowledge. And so in step 1, we're really owning a limitation that our life has become unmanageable because of the way that we've approached our life. Now, most people hook up that unmanageability to the disease, but from an emotional sobriety perspective, we've looked at that the way we've approached our life has created an unmanageable life. And that, and I agree with Bill on this, that is one of the driving forces that got us to turn to alcohol and drugs and other behavior to deal with the fact that we did not know how to meet life in a way that where we could nourish ourselves from the experience. We did not know how to do that. So this first step creates that existential crisis that I called, or that I described before, this place where we realize how wrong we are, but we don't have a new alternative yet, right? We don't know what to do. And that's going to create this existential anxiety. And that anxiety is begging, just like it did when we were young. It wants to be resolved. I'm sure when you've experienced anxiety, you can't wait to find a solution to it, right? Because that's what it is. You're driven to find some way of resolution. And the resolution comes in step 2. So we see that in step 1, we build this charge, right? That's based on this existential crisis. And now in step 2, it gets resolved with hope. Hope that there is another way for us to live our lives. There is an alternative to what we've been doing. There is a way that we can show up and learn how to deal with life and grow from the experience. Not be diminished by it, not be disheartened, not become depressed and anxious. So that hope now creates another charge. It resolves the existential crisis, and now it builds up another charge. Well, wow, what can I do now to bring this into my life? And that's where step 3 comes along, and we make a commitment to a new way of life, to finding a new way of being. And in specific relation to this emotional sobriety, we come to commit ourselves to finding a life that is based on learning how to cope with life on life's terms. That's what we're committing to in step 3, is that life doesn't have to be the way I think it has to be. I have to learn how to deal with what is. And that's a tall order for all of us, because we were not wired to think that way. No one really taught us how to do that. So we're really, very ignorant in terms of this. In fact, my mentor, Dr. Kempler, said that the real diagnosis for all of our suffering is ignorance. And I think he was right on with that. So we make this commitment And so that resolves that charge of hope. Now I'm going to find this. I'm going to find another way of living my life. I'm going to see if I can adopt a healthier set of attitudes and perspectives that are going to allow me to enhance my experience in life instead of diminish me. And so we're on the quest. So, this fourth step comes along and says, okay, well, if you're going to do that, you're going to need to really increase your self-awareness in terms of who you are, and more importantly, who you're not, because that's the real important thing with emotional sobriety, is looking at who we're not. And who we're not is we are people that do not know how to deal with life as it is. That's who we're not. We have no clues about that. So now we're getting on with that business. Well, we share our awareness with an enlightened witness. That's step 5, who now gives us some feedback, helps us become aware of certain things that we weren't aware of before. And so we are now expanding our consciousness that is deeply rooted in humility, with the awareness that I don't know what I don't know. And now I'm willing to start to learn, to start to grow up. So now we get to step 6, and we talk about, we're entirely ready to have these defects of character removed. I love the discussion we've had, calling them character defects. There are alternatives. I love one of the alternatives. I think Glenn brought it up last time about character defaults. These are things that we default to. They are patterns. They are habits. They're habitual ways of thinking and feeling. Today, I want to talk about the trouble we have as a result of our developmental process. So where we hit trouble, and that's why character defect may not be appropriate. So we're growing, right? We all start, in life with what we call the need for environmental support. We have to participate. The first thing we do when we're born is to do what? We have to start supporting ourselves. So that starts early on. We're not able to get up and walk. We don't get dropped like a pony, and get up on all fours, a little staggery, but can walk around the field on our own. We can't do that. But we can do one thing, and that is we can breathe. The first thing we do to support ourselves in our life is to take a breath. And we have to participate in supporting ourselves. And that's the first lesson that we forget. It's my job to inhale and exhale. And if we can't do that, what does the doctor do? Or the nurse, the midwife? A little smack on the butt to get us going, right? Sometimes we all need a smack on the butt. Tell us and remind us to breathe, right? That's what we start breathing. That is our first experience of self-support. Very important, because that breath is supporting our life. That breath is supporting our functioning. That breath is supporting all kinds of activity within us that makes us human. And now we start the development. Now, we're supporting ourselves in that way, but can we go ahead and get to the refrigerator and get a meal for ourselves and prepare it? Of course not. Can we get up and walk around the house? No, we have to move in the direction. So while we support ourselves with breath, we are very, very dependent on our environmental support to survive physically, to survive emotionally. We know how important attachment is early on, and what that does to a child, and what happens to a child when they don't have it. I mean, some natural experiments in World War II, when these children were put in orphanages and there weren't enough caretakers to hold them, they died of what they called analytic depression. They needed that contact. They needed that connection. They needed love. And if they didn't have it, they died. And there was no other physical reason than they didn't have that. That's how important that is in our lives. So this environmental dependence we have is always a part of our life. We cannot survive. Even as adults, we need the oxygen around us. We need food. I can't produce my own sustenance and nourishment within my body. I have to take it in from my environment, but I have to participate in that. I have to pick up the food, I have to prepare it, and I have to bring it in to my mouth, chew it up, and digest it. So there's this interaction between me and my environment in terms of self-support that is developing. Now, psychologically, it's very interesting that physically, a lot of us do a lot better supporting ourselves than we do psychologically. We get stuck. In fact, the impasse that we hit, or what we call arrested development, gets us stuck at the point of thinking that we need other people to support us emotionally in order to be okay. I need that person's validation. I need that person's approval. I need that person's love and concern for me to be okay. Now, we need it in some way, but are we completely dependent on it? Well, I think not. I think that there is a possibility of us supporting ourselves more than ever. Now, it was very interesting that Dr. Harry Tiebout, who was the first psychiatrist that befriended Alcoholics Anonymous, made a very interesting observation when he was working with alcoholics. And I think that he could say this to be true about the general population as well. He says, it's very curious to me that it seems like infantile aspects of the person's ego has persisted into adulthood. I will say that again. Seems it's curious to me that infantile aspects of the person's ego has persisted into adulthood. Well, that begs the question, well, what are those characteristics? Well, I want what I want right now. I'm impatient. I don't want to wait for things to happen. I want things my way. It has to be my way for me to be okay. If I don't get it my way, I'm going to throw a fit. Now, my goodness, how that seems to still be true to the point now where there's pamphlets out on king baby and queen baby, because we see that as such an important issue to take a look at and to address if we're going to have emotional sobriety. The other aspect of this is it says that there are expectations that are set very early in life. And these are not the ones I talked about last time that were based on trauma. Remember, I talked about a whole set of expectations about it can grow out of trauma, wanting that our future to reverse the experience of the pain and the trauma we had in the past. Very legitimate. That's a source of our expectations, but it's not the only source. We don't need to be traumatized to be a king baby. We don't need to be traumatized to be a queen baby. What happens is that we generate very early on in life a set of expectations and ideas on how things are supposed to be, how I'm supposed to be, how you're supposed to be, how relationships are supposed to be, how life is supposed to be. These become a schema that we carry through life. We keep measuring the experiences life to this schema. And if it's unfolding according to this grand plan that we have, then it's okay. Then we're okay. Then life's okay. And if it doesn't fit, oh my goodness. Now we're in trouble. God, I'm 45 years old and I was supposed to be much more successful than I am, or I was supposed to be this, or I was supposed to be that, or I was supposed to have this, or I was supposed to look like this, or whatever it was. This schema now becomes revealed to us. That's why Bill said, whenever we're upset, there's something wrong with us. It's not out there. We've got to look at these ideas that what now we can understand is the demands that we make on what life is supposed to be. Well, what an order. What an order. How do we do that? Well, we started to talk about this in terms of making that emotional sobriety inventory. And when we're upset, to start to unpack the upset and start to try to identify the underlying dependence and the demands that have been generated by that dependence and how we projected that. A lot of this, by the way, is outside your consciousness. You are unaware of that schema. It's like that old story about the two fish that are swimming in water, and they get together and say, hey, what's going on? And they talk like, hey, we're swimming in water. No, is that what this is all around us? We just assume it's what's normal for us because it is normal. You don't know you're in the water until you're taken out of it. By the way, there's a wonderful documentary out there called Octopus, My Teacher. And if you haven't seen it, watch it. It's on Netflix right now. And it is incredibly moving. And it's an incredible documentary. I won't say more about it. Maybe one night we'll spend a whole night talking about it and discussing some of the things you can learn in that documentary, but it's phenomenal. So we have this set of expectations, this schema that's developed on how life is supposed to be. And now we measure everything according to that. We evaluate ourselves. We evaluate our relationships. We evaluate life. We evaluate even God based on our schema. Because that's what we have. That's how we're looking at the world. It is what we call the construction, the social construction, the psychological construction of reality. Now, as we develop in life, our body changes. We all know that. Now, if somehow we let it, our maturity changes. And what's the direction it has to change from environmental support and transcending environmental support to be okay to learning how to be okay yourself? It's a flipping around the St. Francis prayer where it says it's better to comfort than to be comforted. It's better to learn how to comfort ourselves rather than try to get somebody else to comfort us when we're not okay. You see, that's the goal. And that doesn't mean that we can't ask somebody for comfort. But if I ask like Kathy for comfort and I'm dependent on her, then when she doesn't give it to me, I have to make her wrong because I'm trying to manipulate her to give it to me. If I can't get it from her when I'm not dependent on her, then I will be sad that she's not available for me that way. But I will appreciate what is. I will appreciate that she's honest and she's not going to comfort me when she doesn't want to, because that's what, who was it? Thom, the fellow of I'm okay, you're okay. Eric Byrne called a cold prickly instead of a warm fuzzy.
Thom Harris.
Thom Harris, that's a cold prickly. It's not a warm fuzzy. If she's comforting me and she really doesn't want to, I'm really not getting the nourishment and the comfort I want. She's betraying herself. I'm betraying myself by doing that. A warm fuzzy is when somebody wants to comfort you, not when they do it because they have to. So here we are now, we're confronting in this step that, my goodness, I've got a lot of things I need to let go of in terms of learning how to live life based on life's terms, learning how to let go of all of these ideas and concepts of what I'm supposed to be, you're supposed to be, what I should feel, what I don't feel, and all this other stuff in our lives. So when we talk about getting ready to face these things and let them go, what we're really talking about is that we're stuck. We're not sick. We're just stuck in our development. And so I want you to think about this in a very different way. Not that this is pathology. This is just stuck development. And what we can do now is to try to get out of the impasse that we're at. Start to free things up a little bit. I like to think of it as you got to loosen up a little bit, baby. You got to let go of some of these things. Try some different things on. get with Mary and start moving or something like that, or whatever it is that it's all about developing an experimental attitude. Thom and I talk a lot about this in our podcast and the importance of being able to do this. But that is what we're getting ready to do. And if we can do it, and this becomes so important, we've got to be able to do this and support ourselves. So that's where I think it's so important about the attitude we're approaching ourselves with. When I'm looking at myself as bad and needing to become somebody good, well, that's one way of trying to change. Doesn't change people very well that way. We've tried that. We got prisons filled with people that are trying to get rehabilitated that way. It doesn't work. People grow when they get support and when we learn to support ourselves. So that will be my discussion next week when we talk about this stuff. What does self-support really look like? How can we do that? But I will now stop and turn this over to my dear friend Thom and see what he has to say about this madness.
Yes, you're mad. You're completely mad. It's I love this is all right. I'm going to be brief tonight. That's something I say before I just go on and on and on. It's like my first wife used to tell me that no matter what I was doing, I would always say two things, and then I would just start talking, And she said that she could never count just two things. But I said last time that I love. My favorite part has become for now, listening to you and watching you go all the way back to one and bring it up and reconnect. I feel like we're Legoing this thing. We're putting this stuff together again. And it reminds me of something that my very first sponsor in AA told me. He said, and it was all about emotional sobriety when I look back at it. He said, there's 12 steps of recovery. I don't know if this is original to him. That's the first person I ever heard say it, but he said there's 12 steps of recovery. He says, and he used this term specifically. He said only one of them mentions alcohol. He says the rest of them are all about how to be a better person. And then he later told me, he said they're all about how to grow up. And I love that. And that's like, and I've often said, and Alan, you and I probably said that together before, is what do people do who aren't addicts? How do they learn shit? It's like, I'm so grateful for being an addict and for being, screwed up in the particular ways that I am. Because I became such a great fit for this program. And it's been such a lifelong teaching thing for me, but I'm listening tonight and I'm thinking about the growing up part again, because become ready to be entirely ready to let God remove these defects of character becomes for me is because I always talk about like the characteristics rather than character defects, and that we have, every characteristic has an upside and a downside. We become entirely ready to accept full responsibility for ourselves. And this is not, I've said this before to people, and people go, oh, well, you're saying, oh, no higher power, no God. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying however the rest of the universe works, which I do not know how that goes, but I know I'm in charge of my life. I know I'm in charge of my part right here, and in charge, not in control. And I make that distinction frequently. The idea that, and specifically because I am not in control of much, I must be in charge, because I do not control the cards that are dealt me. I must be a good card player. I must be good at being in charge, and being in charge of all the parts of me. The acceptance, all of these characteristics and all these character defects is lines up to me, Alan, with the stuff that we do in therapy, where we help people get in touch with the stuff that they've been running and hiding from in themselves, the dark parts of themselves. One of the simple ways to say it is I finally realized well, I quote Sheldon Kopp with this. Sheldon Kopp said, for everybody who ever worries that your parents are in you, relax, they are. The basically, and whatever good stuff, I have some good stuff from both of my parents I can tell you about, and I can be grateful for those things. But the things that have drawn my attention in my life have been the things I've been scared of, because I could be as shame-filled as my father, and I could be as dark and brooding and depressed and mean as my mother. And when I finally understood, and I believe this is what the sixth step is in part about, when I finally accept full responsibility for that and realize that, oh yeah, there's the dark parts of my personality. There's my potential. There's my alcoholism standing right over there too. I know what it can do. And because better the enemy that I know, better that the enemies it's not that I'm not hiding from, or it's not hiding from me. And the idea is that's just part of me, but I get to choose what comes through. And so it's like if there's a wonderful metaphor, I'll end with this. It's like, if anybody's ever seen the movie, and probably most people have, A Beautiful Mind, Ron Howard film about John Nash, the brilliant man, Russell Crowe played. But he's psychotic and he has these hallucinations, but for us, it's a metaphor of these various characters. He has three characters in the movie. One is a little girl, which would represent for us our inner child in our work. The other is absolutely a saboteur, a bully, that's played by Ed Harris, and who is a wonderful, wonderful bully. And then there's a young man that's a part of that. And I love the fact that there's several things I like about it, but one of the things about that I like is once John Nash in the movie anyway resolves this, figures out what this is, and accepts it. And he does it with logic. He finally figures out that the little girl is not aging. And so he just understands that can't be real. And therefore the others cannot be real. But for the rest of the movie, this is my point about the sixth step. For the rest of the movie, those three characters remain in the movie, but they don't speak and they don't interact. You see them walking beside him sometimes. You see them sitting, he's getting an award at some banquet. They're standing at the other side of the room, and he acknowledges them. He sees them. I don't know if he does or not, but I have this sense that he nods to them. It's like, there they are. That's what we're doing. We're accepting these parts of ourselves. It's okay. Nobody, I tell people all the time, you may think it's bad news that we can't get rid of any of this shit, but it's really okay. We can't, we're not going to get rid of any of it. We're going to add some new wonderful parts, but we're going to most of all be responsible for ourselves. And that's what this program to me is about.
That's fantastic, Thom. I will leave everybody with a summary of what I said tonight. Ontogeny recapitulates recovery. We will explain that more next time. Ontogeny recapitulates recovery. We'll explain that more next time, but just that's a teaser for next time.